Welcome to the Supreme Court Podcast.
All opinions expressed in this podcast do not reflect the views of the Supreme Court. For clarity, the text of the decision prevails.
On June 11, 2025, the Supreme Court of the Philippines marked its 124th anniversary. Let's delve into the rich history of the Supreme Court, from its establishment in 1901 to its evolving role in shaping Philippine law and democracy. We will uncover little-known facts about the court, including where it first held office, its buildings then and now, and what more can we expect from the Supreme Court. We will also talk about some of its landmark decisions that have left a lasting impact on the nation. Most of all, we will discuss how the Supreme Court maintains its integrity and independence amid so-called political pressures and the innovations underway through its Strategic Plan for Judicial Innovations 2022 to 2027, or the SPJI. As the Supreme Court nears its 125th anniversary next year, it's important to take a moment and ponder. What can the public look forward to in the future? And what does today's youth need to understand about the vital role in safeguarding justice and the rule of law? Hi, I'm Attorney Mike Navallo, Supreme Court Chief Communications Officer. It's the 13th of June 2025, and today we talk about the very institution that I am serving, the Supreme Court, which celebrated its 124th anniversary exactly 2 days ago. And joining us to talk about this topic is the spokesperson of the Supreme Court, Attorney Camille Sue Mae L. Ting. Attorney Camille, thanks again for joining us and welcome back to the Supreme Court Podcast.
Thank you, Attorney Mike, for having me here again. Hello, everyone.
Attorney Camille, just for the benefit of our listeners, especially the Gen Z, can you give us a brief background or history of the Supreme Court of the Philippines?
Okay, so the Supreme Court of the Philippines is basically the highest court in the country. Think of it as the final boss when it comes to legal matters. It was officially created on June 11, 1901, during the American colonial period through Act Number 136 of the Second Philippine Commission. So, as you said earlier, it's been existing for 124 years now. So, the court's main job is to settle legal issues, especially when it comes to people's rights, and to make sure that laws and government actions actually follow the Constitution. So, let's say if there's a question like, is this law fair? Or can the government even do that? The Supreme Court steps in and gives a final answer. And once they make a ruling, that's it. No one can overrule them. So the Supreme Court is made up of 15 justices, 1 Chief Justice, and 14 Associate Justices. And they are independent from the President and Congress. So just to point out, this independence is very important because it helps keep our democracy balanced. So at the end of the day, the Supreme Court is there to protect our rights, uphold justice, and make sure everyone plays by the rules, whether you're a regular citizen or someone in power.
Right, and it's often easy to forget that the Supreme Court is there because it's always been there. But I'm
Yes.
wondering, what was the judicial landscape when the Supreme Court was established in 1901?
And so when the Supreme Court was established or created in 1901, the Philippines was going through a major transition. We had just come out of more than 300 years under Spanish rule, and instead of gaining full independence, we found ourselves under American control. So yes, it was a time of big changes and a lot of uncertainty. During this time, the justice system was kind of a patchwork. It was made up of Spanish colonial laws, old customs, and even some church law. Before the Supreme Court, the highest court was called the Real Audiencia. So this was during the Spanish times. However, it was not an independent court, as the Governor General, who was the top Spanish official here, also ran that court. So there was really no system of checks and balances among the branches of government. But the creation of the Supreme Court in 1901 changed that. For the first time, the idea of separation of powers was introduced, where the courts, the president, and the legislature each had their own separate responsibilities and duties, and they couldn't control or interfere with each other. So this idea came from Enlightenment thinkers who believed in fairness, justice, and democracy.
Attorney Camille, tell us a bit more about the history of the Supreme Court. Like, for instance, where was the first office of the Supreme Court? And Do we actually own the building that's currently occupied by the Supreme Court? And what about the compound in Baguio? So many things about the structure that houses the Supreme Court.
Okay, Attorney Mike, let's go through a quick history, not just of the Supreme Court, but also the buildings that have housed it over the years. So, when the Supreme Court was officially established in 1901, it first set up office in the old Real Audiencia building in Intramuros, Manila. This building was constructed in 1870 and stood right beside Manila Cathedral and faced Plaza Mayor. It was more than just a convenient location, it was actually very symbolic. So the Real Audiencia was the highest court during Spanish colonial rule. So the Supreme Court's presence there represented somewhat of a bridge between the old colonial justice system and the new one under American rule. The Real Audiencia building was also known as the Arellano Building in honor of the first Chief Justice, Cayetano Arellano. Then in 1938, the court moved to the historic Ayuntamiento de Manila after the House of Representatives vacated the building. So the court didn't really completely leave the Real Audiencia building. It had three buildings within the Intramuros complex.
Mhm.
But again, this setup did not last long because World War II devastated the walled city in 1945, and only the Araulio buildings, which housed the Court of First Instance, survived in its original form. This is now currently home to the Comelec Annex building.
Mm. Interesting.
Now, after the war, the court needed a new home. It found one in what was known as Villamor Hall, the former Conservatory of Music of the University of the Philippines in Manila. This building, still used by the Supreme Court today, now houses the Office of the Court Administrator. We refer to it now as the Old Building. So the Supreme Court's current main office here in Padre Faura is called the New Building, although it's not exactly new. It was built in the 1930s and originally served as the UP's library. The Department of Foreign Affairs then used it for a time, and when they moved out around 1990s, the Supreme Court moved in.
So does the Supreme Court own it now?
Actually, no. It
Mm.
is still the UP's, and they have allowed us to use the buildings for all this time.
Very interesting. But we also have another building, right? The Supreme Court compound in Baguio. Is that owned by the Supreme Court?
Oh, yes, that building is owned by the Supreme Court. So every April, the Supreme Court heads to Baguio City for its annual summer sessions. This tradition started in 1948 under Chief Justice Manuel V. Moran. So the Baguio building was constructed in 1964 specifically for this purpose. And even back then, during the American colonial period, Baguio was the summer capital of the Philippines, a cool retreat for government officials. So today, the court continues that tradition, using the peaceful mountain settings to focus on deciding urgent and important cases.
How significant a milestone is this for the Philippine judiciary that it actually reached 124 years, just 3 years short of the Republic?
So the Supreme Court's anniversary is definitely a big deal, as it marks more than a century of standing up for justice and protecting the rights of every Filipino. Since it was founded in 1901, the court has seen the country through some really intense times. We went through colonial rule, political unrest, martial law, and eventually the return of democracy. So through it all, the court has remained a steady, independent voice for fairness and the rule of law. And actually, Attorney Mike, the Supreme Court is one of the oldest institutions in our government, and it represents the values we expect from our justice system, which include independence, probity, competence, and integrity. So this anniversary is actually not just about looking back at the history of the court. It's also a moment for us to reflect on how crucial the Supreme Court is in building a just, democratic future for all of us.
Right, and you talked about history. There is a rich history in the Supreme Court. I remember there were instances in the past when one of the justices was actually killed during the war.
Yes.
But give us an idea of how the Supreme Court actually evolved over the years in terms of shaping Philippine law and jurisprudence.
Oh, so the Supreme Court has come a very long way. It's no longer just a court of last resort, as it's known, that settles legal disputes. It is now a powerful institution that helps shape our laws, protect our rights, and keep our government in check. Back during the Spanish and American colonial periods, our courts didn't have much independence, as I already mentioned before. They mostly followed the will of the colonial rulers. But things changed after we gained independence. The 1935 Constitution, for example, gave the Supreme Court the power of judicial review, meaning it could strike down any law or executive action that violated the Constitution. This power was kept and even strengthened in later constitutions, especially in the 1987 Constitution, which was designed to safeguard against abuse of power. So, hence, the court's expanded power to determine grave abuse of discretion on any part of the government. The Constitution made sure that the court would serve as a strong guardian of democracy and human rights. Now, in recent decades, the Supreme Court has ruled on cases involving national issues. It has made significant decisions on environmental protection, such as in the case of Oposa versus Factoran, government corruption, in the case of Belgica versus Ochoa, and political legitimacy, in the case of David versus Arroyo. These cases show that the court doesn't just interpret the law, it actually helps define what justice looks like in real life. So the court also has worked to improve how it functions and makes justice more accessible and simpler over the years. For example, from time to time, it updates the rules of procedure, such as in 2019, when it updated the rules of civil procedure to incorporate technical advancements and make court processes faster and more efficient. They also came up with a procedure for small claims to make the collection of money, one of the most common legal issues in our society, faster, simpler, and less expensive. The court has also introduced new legal remedies, popularly known as the human rights writs. So we have the writ of amparo and habeas data to better protect people's rights, especially in cases of abuse or threats to life and privacy. We also have the writ of kalikasan, which protects the people's rights to a healthy environment.
Okay, so it's interesting that there are a lot of changes in terms of the rules set by the court, but in terms of a roadmap for reforming the Supreme Court, can you share with us some of the interesting developments in the recent years, Attorney Camille?
So, one of the most important recent developments we all know is the Strategic Plan for Judicial Innovations, or the SPJI, which runs from 2022 to 2027. So, this plan is the court's roadmap for modernizing the justice system. In simple terms, the SPJI aims to make justice faster, fairer, and more accessible to all Filipinos. It includes efforts to improve court technology, reduce case backlogs, and make the system more transparent and responsive. So it's actually a very big step towards making sure that justice isn't just a promise, it's something people actually experience.
I know the Supreme Court is known for deciding cases, so I'm sure the listeners will be curious. In your opinion, which of the Supreme Court decisions in the past decade or two had the strongest impact on the country?
Supreme Court had so many cases. It decided
Right.
so many cases. It's very hard to choose, Attorney Mike. So one of the cases off the top of my head would be Sulu versus Medjaldea, which involved the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region of Muslim Mindanao. So in that case, the court upheld the constitutionality of the Bangsamoro Organic Law because it said it did not make BARM a separate state from the Philippines. It also upheld the parliamentary form of the Bangsamoro government. But at the same time, it declared unconstitutional the inclusion of the province of Sulu in BARM.
Very consequential,
Mhm.
especially in that part of Mindanao.
Very,
Attorney Camille.
very.
Anything else? What about cases involving perhaps family law?
Yeah, so the most important, I guess, case involving family law and gender would be Tanandal versus Andal. So this case clarified the interpretation of psychological incapacity as a ground for nullity of marriage. The court held that psychological incapacity is actually a legal concept and not a medical concept. So hence, it need not be proven by a medical expert.
Right, the implications on the cost of
Yes, you
trying
don't.
to prove psychological incapacity in court, right?
Yes, you
Attorney
don't
Camille?
need to get a psychiatrist as a witness, unlike before.
And the Supreme Court also came out strongly against corruption allegations in the government.
Yes, actually, in two cases, the court disallowed the disbursement of certain funds, the most popular being the pork barrel system, or the PDAF as we know it. So the court said that the PDAF or pork barrel was unconstitutional for violating principles of separation of powers, among others, and it permanently disallowed the release of PDAF funds. Now, after this happened, there was another fund that came up. It's called the Disbursement Acceleration Program, or the DAP, which allowed the cross-border transfer of savings to fund projects that was not approved by Congress or not covered by the GAA or General Appropriations Act. So the Supreme Court also struck that down.
Mm-hmm. And the Supreme Court also tackled cybercrime and anti-terrorism.
Yes, actually. So back in 2014, the Supreme Court upheld parts of the Cybercrime Prevention Act of 2012, but at the same time, it struck down provisions which they said violated free speech, privacy, and due process. And when it comes to the terrorism, again, we know what happened back in 2001. There was an escalation of terrorism across the globe. So most countries were very careful, and they started having anti-terror acts and laws. So we also had one, and this was questioned before the Supreme Court.
2021, right? This ruling in Calleja versus Executive Secretary.
Yes. So the Supreme Court upheld all of the provisions except for two. So this ruling emphasized the state's duty to protect national security, but at the same time, it balanced the rights of the people under the Constitution.
Is there any ruling among the more significant ones, Attorney Camille, that personally appealed to you among the cases recently decided by the Supreme Court?
I guess I was with the court already at this time, and it was during the time around 2016, 2017, when the drug policy of the government was in full force. So there were a lot of people that were being prosecuted for drug cases and drug violations. And it was during this time that the Supreme Court declared unconstitutional the prohibition in RA 9165 against plea bargaining in drugs cases. The court said that under the Constitution, it had the exclusive power to promulgate rules of practice, and plea bargaining is considered a rule of practice.
And so we now have a framework
Yes,
for
we
dealing
do.
with plea bargaining in relation to drug cases
Yes.
by the Supreme Court.
Yes.
Right. Interesting. So that's quite a lot of cases to discuss, Attorney Camille. But you did mention SPJI, the Strategic Plan for Judicial Innovations. It's from 2022 to 2027. It's nearing a completion. We are just 2 years away. Can you name some key reforms that have been implemented under SPJI?
So since the launch of the SPJI, we've seen a wave of meaningful reforms across the judiciary. And what the Chief Justice always emphasizes is that the SPJI is a collective effort. So it's not just the work of one office or one person. It's the result of all the justices and their staff working together towards a shared vision of a modern, efficient, and accessible justice system. Now, to guide this transformation, the SPJI is organized around three major outcomes: efficiency, innovation, and access. Under efficiency, which aims to streamline court processes to reduce delays and improve case management, there is the establishment of the Office of the Regional Court Manager.
So essentially, under ORCM, you have a reorganized Office of the Court Administrator
Yes,
instead of a centralized.
Yes, a decentralized Office
Right.
of the Court Administrator that regionalizes the services and makes them closer to the courts for more efficiency.
And it's not just the only reform that regionalizes the activities of the court,
No.
right?
Exactly. Actually, another one that is regionalized is the bar examinations, both for the Philippine bar and the Sharia special bar exams.
So quite a lot of reforms. You can say that some of the rules have even been revised.
So apart from bar reforms, which we see digitalized and regionalized bar examinations, we have also issued the Code of Professional Responsibility and Accountability to improve ethical performance in the judiciary. The Judiciary Marshal's Office was already established, and a Chief Marshal has been appointed. And the Supreme Court has also been developing health and welfare programs through a unified HMO. And we also have mental health units being established in the Supreme Court and regionally. And there are also child minding centers in the courts for the busy parents. So, under the target outcome of innovation, these are just a few projects that have already started and are being implemented. We have the digitalization of certain procedures, such as payment of court fees and bar exam fees through the JEPS or the Judiciary e-payment solutions. We have the e-filing, which started last year in 2024 and is in full force. So this means that pleadings in first and second level courts for civil cases must be emailed to the court. And soon we will see that the Supreme Court will now be accepting e-filing, but not through email, but through the PJP or the Philippine Judiciary Platform.
Right, and that's what we call e-court, which is
Yes,
launching
that
very, very
is a
soon.
component of e-court version 2.
All right. And of course, during the pandemic, there were also some technological advancements that the court had to resort to
Yes.
because of the exigencies of the time.
Yeah, so the court said that we couldn't keep the courts closed. The wheels of justice had to continue turning. So the Supreme Court, tapped into technology to ensure the trial continued. And we did this through video conferencing hearings. And the court is also exploring the use of artificial intelligence in some of its procedures. For example, would be the transcriptions of the stenographers of the trial notes. And the Supreme Court has already pilot tested the use of scriptics or voice-to-text transcriptions for stenographers. And it is also pilot testing the use of AI to aid in legal research.
And all of these are, of course, intended to speed up at least the processes in court. Of course, there's a fear, Attorney Camille, that this might replace court personnel.
No, yes, that fear is understandable, but the Supreme Court, through the Chief Justice and other justices, when they go around the regions talking about e-filing and all that, they always emphasize that technology is not there to replace people. Technology is there to help or assist people in performing their jobs more efficiently.
But to be clear, I mean, there could be a misconception that the Supreme Court is now using AI and that judges can now resort to using ChatGPT, for example, to draft decisions of the Supreme Court. Are we there yet?
Actually, not yet. So the Supreme Court is taking a very cautious approach to the use of AI, and the use of AI in crafting decisions, that's still on hold pending the promulgation of an AI governance framework by the Supreme Court.
And one key goal under SPJI that you mentioned, Attorney Camille, is to really make justice accessible to more people. So under SPJI, can you mention some activities perhaps or projects or initiatives that the Supreme Court is resorting to in order that more people can actually have access to justice?
So an important initiative under Access would be the ULAS rules, or the Rules on Unified Legal Aid Service, which actually mandates lawyers to render at least 60 hours of pro bono legal aid every 3 years in favor of indigent Filipinos. And another initiative is the strengthening of Sharia in the country. This can be seen through the reforms in the Sharia bar. So for the first time, the Sharia bar was held in 4 local testing centers. And there is also an option for Sharia bar takers to take the exam in Arabic.
Attorney Camille, a key thrust of the SPJI is really to adapt technology, right, in the court
Yes.
processes for efficiency, for innovation, and improving access. Will we now see as the norm the conduct of online hearings, for example, e-filing, e-subpoenas, and e-notarization perhaps? Will this become permanent features of the Philippine court system? And do we have parameters to determine how effective and successful these are?
So these new, I'd say, digital tools are going to be permanent features of the Philippine court system. So online hearings are here to stay. E-filing as well. So the modernization of the Philippine judiciary is not just a temporary response to the COVID-19 pandemic. It's actually a long-term commitment. So there's no turning back to the old, fully manual ways. The direction is clear. We move forward. Now, to ensure that these digital innovations are effective and sustainable, The Supreme Court has put in place key structures, such as the Supreme Court Management Committee. It is this body that is tasked with monitoring and evaluating the progress of these digital initiatives. It also ensures that implementation is on track and aligned with the judiciary's goals. The Supreme Court also established what we call the SPDO, or the Strategic Planning and Development Office, to sustain the SPJI's momentum even beyond 2027.
All right. And very, very soon, the Supreme Court is rolling out e-notarization, Attorney Camille. We have yet to wait for updates on that. So I suggest they watch out for that. And we just have a recent amendment to the 2004 rules, right?
Yes,
On
20
notarial practices.
Yes.
So they're now required to submit
PDF files.
of notarized files that are kept by lawyers in
Yes.
their notarial registers.
That's
So
correct.
it's really moving towards adapting technology in every aspect and every facet of the Supreme Court. But how is the Supreme Court in terms of ensuring that judges and court personnel are actually prepared for this digital transformation and reform?
Okay, so the Chief Justice and Associate Justices always say that as we move forward with the digital transformation, we want to assure everyone, especially our judges and court personnel, that no one will be left behind. So this is not just about adopting new technology, it's about empowering people. So we are committed to reskilling, upskilling, and building the capacity of our workforce through comprehensive training programs, seminars, and workshops. For example, I mentioned earlier that we had the voice-to-text transcriptions using AI, but we always assure our stenographers that they will not be replaced. They will be equipped with new tools and trained to use them efficiently. So the goal is not to replace, but to repurpose and enhance. So we are doing our best to ensure that all personnel are supported and absorbed into this new digital environment. This transformation is a shared journey, and we are taking it together.
And what about transparency, Attorney Camille, integrity and public trust in the judiciary? Because I think that's really one of the main concerns right now.
Yes.
Can the people trust the judiciary to rule fairly and timely when pressing issues facing the country?
So, to strengthen transparency, integrity, and public trust, the Supreme Court is taking big steps to make the justice system more open and accessible to every Filipino. So, as we already mentioned earlier, we have embraced digital technology to improve how courts work. So, for example, we have e-filing and online hearings, which makes it easier and faster for people to access justice, especially those who live very far away from the courts. Court fees can likewise be paid online through the JEPs, eliminating the need to physically go to the courts and line up, which can take a few hours. We also make sure that the Supreme Court decisions and rulings are available online. So these are posted on the Supreme Court website, on the e-library, and on social media pages, along with press releases written in plain language so that more people can understand what the courts are doing and why. So this is part of our commitment under the SPJI, where one of our main goals is really accessibility. We want every Filipino, especially the youth, to feel that the justice system is not just for lawyers or judges, but for everyone. So by making the judiciary more open and easier to understand, we are sending a clear message that we are transparent, we act with integrity, and we are here to serve you. Also, Attorney Mike, we have what we call the JPAS, or the Judiciary Public Assistance Section, which receives emails, phone, and in-person queries from the public. So we also make sure that pleadings in significant cases are uploaded to the public pleading section on the Supreme Court website, which the public can access and download for free. So it helps them better understand where the parties are coming from, what the issues are when it comes to cases of public interest. And also, as a way of opening the court to the public, we provide free guided tours of the Supreme Court premises. So guests who are usually students and visitors from foreign governments learn about the history of the court, including stories behind its buildings. It includes interactive discussions on the Supreme Court's functions. Guests can actually see rare historical artifacts preserved at the SC Memorabilia Hall. And sometimes, if they're lucky enough, They get to meet in person the Supreme Court justices, including the Chief Justice.
So that's why I see a lot of more people coming into the court
Yes.
these days with the stickers, meaning they're guests or visitors. Right. But speaking of transparency, Attorney Camille, how does the court balance making itself more accessible to the public, but at the same time maintaining a certain level of independence that is needed in deciding decisions?
So the Supreme Court is actually designed to be independent and impartial. In fact, independence is one of its four core values alongside probity, competence, and integrity. So, to illustrate how this independence is maintained, the following safeguards are in place. First, we have constitutional safeguards. So, under the 1987 Constitution, it guarantees judicial independence by giving the Supreme Court fiscal autonomy, security of tenure, and the exclusive power of judicial review. So these provisions were meant to shield the judiciary from political pressure and interference. Next, appointments to the Supreme Court is merit based. So while the president appoints justices, this selection is screened and guided by the Judicial and Bar Council, or the JBC. This helps ensure that appointments are based on qualifications and not politics. Then we have security of tenure. Justices serve until the age of 70, and they can only be removed through impeachment, which requires a high level of congressional approval. So this protects them from arbitrary dismissal and reinforces their independence from the other branches of government. And then we have ethical standards and internal accountability. So among the branches of government, the court has the highest level of ethical standards imposed on them.
Mhm. But personally, Attorney Camille, what are you looking forward to as the Supreme Court approaches its 125th anniversary next year?
I guess I'm looking forward to more modernization and inclusivity. So we know that the way people seek justice is changing with the times, and we need to keep up. Our justice system must be ready to serve every Filipino, no matter who they are or where they come from. That's why the Supreme Court is carefully reviewing their policies to make sure that barriers that make it difficult for people to access justice are removed. We want every Filipino to feel confident they can turn to the law for help and that they will be treated fairly, regardless of their background, gender, ethnicity, or beliefs. So, this anniversary is not just a time to look back at our history, it's also a chance to look forward, to build a justice system that truly works for everyone.
So, Attorney Camille, just by way of closing our discussion, what do you want the future Filipino generation, especially Gen Alpha and Gen Z, to understand about the Supreme Court's role today?
So, to the Gen Alpha, to the Gen Z, and all future generations, the Supreme Court isn't just a building or a group of people in robes. It's your protector. It stands to defend your rights and make sure that justice is served fairly. It's one of the strongest foundations of our democracy, making sure that laws are followed and that everyone, no matter who they are, has a voice. I also want to emphasize that you, the young and future generations, matter. Your opinions, your values, your concerns, they all help shape the justice system. So the law isn't just something that happens in courtrooms. It's something that affects your everyday life. So stay engaged. Remember that you have the power to influence change. Advocate for justice. Be aware of what is happening in society. Read the news. Be critical. Your active involvement will help strengthen our democracy. Imagine a future where justice is not just a concept, but a lived reality of every Filipino. Together, we can build that future.
Very well said, Attorney Camille. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you, Attorney Mike, for having me here. It's been a pleasure.
Right, so we look forward to the next time. And if you wish to know more about the Supreme Court, you may visit our website at sc.judiciary.gov.ph. Here's Steph Atendido Beltran, Supreme Court Information Officer, for this week's Roundup.
From the Supreme Court of the Philippines, here's the latest.
On Tuesday, June 10, 2025, Honorable Raul B. Villanueva took his oath as the 195th Associate Justice of the Supreme Court before Chief Justice Alexander G. Hismundo. Villanueva, who hails from Region 1, is the first appointee to the High Court of President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. Prior to his appointment, Justice Villanueva served as court administrator for 3 years and as deputy court administrator for 12 years. He joined the bench in 2002 as presiding judge of Regional Trial Court Branch 255 Las Piñas City. He also served as acting presiding judge of RTC Branch 267, Taguig City, and RTC Branch 4, Manila. Justice Villanueva earned both his bachelor's degree in economics and law degree from the University of the Philippines. In a bid to modernize and streamline notarial reporting, the Supreme Court en banc has approved amendments to the 2004 notarial rules, specifically on the submission of digital copies of notarial entries and instruments acknowledged by notaries public. Under the amended 2004 notarial rules, notaries public are now required to keep in portable document format or PDF the certified copy of each month's notarial entries and the duplicate original copy of instruments acknowledged before them. These should be emailed to the clerk of court within the first 10 days of the following month using the notary public's official email address. If there are no entries for the month, a formal statement confirming this must be submitted instead. The amended 2004 rules is different from the rules on electronic notarization, which applies to electronic documents and has yet to be implemented. Chief Justice Alexander Esmundo on Thursday, June 11, underscored the significance of honoring the past and looking forward to the future with conviction at the 124th anniversary celebration of the Supreme Court in Padre Faura, Manila. Highlighting reforms and innovations, the Chief Justice also reiterated the Filipino people deserve a justice system that is not only impartial and fair, but is also responsive and ever ready for what lies ahead. An anniversary photo exhibit was launched at the SC New Building lobby on Tuesday. This year's celebration is themed Honoring the Past, Empowering the Present, Inspiring the Future. On Thursday, June 12, Chief Justice Esmundo served as guest of honor at the flag raising and wreath-laying rites in the celebration of the 127th anniversary of the proclamation of the country's independence held at the Emilio Aguinaldo Shrine in Kawit, Cavite. In his message, the Chief Justice reminded the Filipino people that true independence comes with a responsibility to strive for a more just society and for continuous development of our nation. Meanwhile, the Chief Justice reflected on the progress achieved so far and emphasized the need for continuing reforms in the justice sector at the culminating ceremony of the European Union's Governance in Justice 2 program, or EU Go Just 2, on Friday in Pasig City. The Chief Magistrate discussed the ongoing reform initiatives under the Strategic Plan for Judicial Innovations 2022 to 2027 as he expressed gratitude to the Go Just 2 for their support towards building a judiciary that delivers real justice to the people. Associate Justice Samuel Garlan has urged law graduates to raise the bar in their personal and professional lives as future administrators of justice in a speech at the 87th commencement exercises of the Arellano University School of Law held in Manila on June 9. Justice Garland stressed the unique power and responsibility of being a lawyer, stating that their excellence elevates the legal profession, thus ultimately strengthening the nation. The SC, through the Committee on Gender Responsiveness in the Judiciary, has reaffirmed its commitment towards an equal and inclusive justice as it officially commemorates Pride Month with a kick-off activity on Monday at the SC Courtyard in Manila. Activities to be held during the month include outreach programs at the Home for the Golden Gaze and Project Duyan, which provide care and support to children living with HIV. The CGRJ is co-chaired by Associate Justices Henry John Paul V. Inting, Josep Lopez, and Maria Filomena Singh. Finally, on Friday, the Philippine Women Judges Association, led by its president, SC Associate Justice Ami Lazaro Javier, launched the first of its annual art exhibits titled Her Brush, Her Story, The Hues of a Woman, at the Manila Clock Tower Museum. The exhibit, which features artworks by women who are persons deprived of liberty, aims to empower them through creative expression as a means to support a prospective sustainable livelihood. The artworks will be on display until July 18, 2025. You are now up to date with the Philippine Supreme Court. I am Tiffany Dobeltran, Supreme Court Information Officer.
And that's our podcast this week. Join us again next time for a detailed discussion of select cases decided by the Supreme Court. I'm Attorney Mike Navallo, your Supreme Court Chief Communications Officer. You can catch this podcast on the Supreme Court Public Information Office's accounts on X, Facebook, Instagram, Threads, YouTube, and Spotify. You can also catch previous editions on our website and on Spotify. This podcast episode was produced by the Supreme Court Public Information Office with Attorney Karen Martinez, Jay Rimpilio, and May Sibal as researchers, Brian Austria, Lawrence Alanyo, Austin Aliscad, and Bea Batong as audio and video editors, and Tyke Flores and Jerome Batumalaki as web editors.